What's up, gang? It's Kevin, Life22. And, yeah, this is a gut shot. That's right. We're here doing a podcast on a book I just finished, and it was a recommendation, which I followed up with another recommendation from Robert Kiyosaki from when we did those Rich Dad, Poor Dad books. So, this one is Emotional Intelligence, and it was a phenomenal book. It actually, I was surprised because I started listening to this book, and then it was funny because I went into a Dr. Jordan B. Peterson podcast down on his Maps of Meaning, and I thought it was man, he's talking about the same shit that this guy's talking about, and I was like, this is great. I didn't realize how much we know about the human brain. Obviously, we don't know that much about the human brain comparatively, but it was funny that we knew so much about the human brain in this book. And my entire life, I don't know, maybe it was how you're raised kind of thing. My dad always told me, emotions are for weaklings and blah, blah, blah. That was how I was raised. And, but your inability, you're just pawning off your emotions to not understanding them and not tolerating them. Really not a weakness, really. It's a strength. If you understand that you have emotions and you're not going to do without them. You're not going to throw them away. You're just going to live with them. So if you're going to live with them, why not live with them in harmony and understand how they work and understand how to tolerate certain emotions? And this book explains all that. It does all that. It talks about brain function. It talks about all these different things like the lizard brain, Joe Rogan talks about things like that he doesn't call it lizard brain in this book, but it's funny how he talks about how it is one of the first things that is in the evolutionary track, right? There was basic necessity, and then there is emotional thinking, and then there is rational thought. So rational thought is a higher form of thinking, but how would all those it's funny how all of those electrodes shoot back down to the more primitive form of your brain, right? So you do rational thinking, but the problem is that the command center is back here. So then you have all these brain processes. You have all these brain processes, and these things are rational thought, but it shoots through and it still uses the neural networking that is your emotional brain processes, and then it goes to your base, what we consider second nature, right? The breathing, all the base functions. So it goes from your operating system, and the higher functions your operating system, your base level of your operating functions, to your BIOS, if you will, if you're trying to think of yourself as a computer system, right? To the things that just barely runs your hardware. So, which is funny because Jordan Peterson, as soon as I finished, I was in the middle of finishing this book, and I started it when we went down to Memphis few months ago. So obviously a lot of you guys are stalking me. We went down to Memphis, and I did this book, and it was very funny that I got this, I was listening to all this, and then all of a sudden I got home and I wasn't in the mood to finish this book at the moment, but I had jumped into Jordan Peterson's lectures series from his career at the University of Toronto on Maps of Meaning, which is another book that he's done that I don't believe I've done on the show, but very well worth it. Anyways, he was talking about a lot of these different processes that happen, and it's just funny how life works, right? You're doing something, you're working on something, and something that exactly mimics what you're going through is doing. So this book breaks it down. So they do the introduction, right? It's the 25th year anniversary version. So they do their opening credits, Aristotle's challenge, our journey. Then they jump into part one, the emotional brain. And they talk about what are emotions for, the anatomy of an emotional hijacking. I mean, we're talking like we're barely an hour in before we hit part two. And then the nature of emotional intelligence, when smart is dumb, know thyself, passions, slaves. That's an entire hour chapter, by the way. The master aptitude, the roots of empathy, the social arts, and then we're into part three. Emotional intelligence applied, inmate enemies, managing with heart, mind, and medicine. And now we're jumping into part four, which is windows of opportunity, the family crucible, trauma and emotional relearning. Let's see here. Temperament is not destiny. Part five, which is emotional literacy. And I mean, these two chapters are pretty lengthy, and we're talking like an hour and a half a piece. The cost of emotional literacy, schooling the emotions, and then they get into the appendix, which is what is emotion, hallmarks of emotional mind, the neural circuitry of fear. It's ABC. D is W.T. Grant's consortium, active ingredients of prevention programs. E, the self-science curriculum. Appendix F is social and emotional learning results, acknowledgments, interview with the author and John Kabat-Zinn, and then ending credits. So, I mean, we start working. So I'm going to jump back here. So you jump into part one of this this book. He talks about the emotional brain. So the reason that I jumped into this book was, first off, that I noticed myself in a lacking, but also that Robert Kiyosaki had mentioned it, and he is the guru of the financial world. Like, if Robert Kiyosaki doesn't know how it's going on, then, I mean, we're all screwed. But Robert's a great guy for talking about a lot of this stuff. It's just, so it's funny that, like, he doesn't talk about a lot of this stuff, Robert, per se, but he talks about a lot of the books that he's learned, and that's going to be one of the next books we get into, which is like a 10-minute children's book called Stone Soup. We're going to get into that next, but Robert recommended this book, and I threw it on my list, and it was a good book. I thought that I was lacking in the subject, and I wanted to listen to the subject. And I was surprised how interested I was in learning about a lot of this stuff, and a lot of these things that, like, it just resonates with you. You're like, wow, is that why I do that? Is that why I do this? Is that why I do that? Is that why I'm having an issue with my kid? Like, it's like, it speaks to you. You start listening to some of these things. So, like, I mean, what are emotions for? The anatomy and emotional hijacking. I mean, like, that's like the first hour of this book. I remember being in, like, I remember being in, like, just on the expressway. It was late at night, just trying to finish up my trip, and just listening to a lot of these, like, chapters, and just being like, man. And it would keep you awake, because you're like, I mean, I don't know about you, but I was interested. Like, this was very captivating stuff, right? And it's hard to fall asleep when you're captivated. So the nature of emotional intelligence, when smart is dumb, it just starts talking about all of that. That there's something to it where you just, like, you're like, man, it makes so much sense. It's so clear that you can just, that you're your brain is built on layers, right? It's a cake. It's made layer after layer. They don't just bake it all at once. I mean, you are baked all at once, but it was years of refining that recipe layer by layer, and how the human body is layered is really what it comes down to. And it's this book, I highly recommend it. I can't put my finger on all of like the facets of it. I mean, we are talking, how many hours is this book? 13 hours, 32 minutes. So this is a 13 and a half hour book. It's hard for me to go over all of it in 12 minutes or less. So, but Dan Goleman, he did a really good job. Why it can matter more than IQ. Emotional intelligence. No, it really does. You're like, because what is IQ, right? Like, it's the human's grasp at everything. And like, this book brings up just as much as most of the books that we read on this channel. It's bringing you there. So if you don't like the book, if I don't like the book, at least you're joining the path with us. At least you're joining us on this adventure. So give this one a listen. The 25th year anniversary edition. Emotional Intelligence by Dan Goleman. We'll catch you guys next time. Life22.